Okay, so John and I, he can't be here today, but he's got a really great handle on the ecosystem as well. We started thinking about what is going on with supply and demand back in the spring. And I remember even before that when John first threw something over the fence at me about like, hey, what is this MCP protocol? And I looked at it and started reading through Anthropic's documentation. It said something about like caching prompts with the server. And I was like, oh, all right, that sounds like a pretty good idea, actually. Like save a little bit of context window right there. So we did this analysis. I should have had a QR code, but if you just search John Turo MCP, it'll pull up his Substack, and you can read through the blog there. It's pretty interesting. So this is sort of a follow-up looking at like what's happened in the ecosystem, how diverse is it, how concentrated is it, where is some of the opportunity, and where have there been some breakout successes. So I am an applied data scientist at Madrona. I'd say 80% of my job is on the applied side, means the engineering work, 20% is on the actual analytics and data science side, but that's just kind of how it goes when you're an IC at a small company. Okay, so by now there's SDK for pretty much every popular language out there. And I'm just showing the star count right here. So star counts from GitHub, it's not exactly demand, but it gives you an idea of the popularity. And while we can see that the Python SDK is by far the most popular in terms of star count, the official MCP registry, which is connected to Anthropic, actually has most of the production packages there available through NPMs of PyPy. So it seems like, for the most part, TypeScript, JavaScript, those are the more popular production languages for MCP servers that are publicly available. Unlike Ria, I have some notes here because that was impressive doing that without notes. Yep, so also just like one thing to point out here, we have 3 categories that we're looking at this through. One is just the SDK package in TypeScript, because this is sort of a hybrid package that's used both for development and also the running of a lot of servers, especially remote servers. And I'll talk a little bit more about the rise in popularity of remote MCP servers versus locally installed MCP servers. And then the other 2 categorizations, client servers, packages that you would just like download from NPM, be able to run immediately with your client to do some sort of use case or task with your LLM, and server development is packages that are supporting the development of MCP servers that you might want to be building. So there's this huge spike in May, but the real like first buzz started to be kind of back in February, which is why that's where we start our analysis from. MCPs were first launched in November of last year, so we're almost at the 1-year mark of this existing. We can see this just explosive growth in the Model Context Protocol SDK, and decent sized growth for the other categories as well, but just bear in mind that the SDK is used for both building and running MCP servers. And then, as expected, there's more downloads for the clients that you can just out of the box use, but there's consistent growth in some of these server packages. So we want to ask ourselves, what has gone on with diversity in this ecosystem? So looking back, you can see popularity, sort of non-stationary movement, probably will go up forever with time just because we're increasingly using AI with more adoption. But we're seeing a concentration in the ecosystem. And so you can think about this as like if there was a 0 on this chart, 0 would be there's no uncertainty in what packages are being downloaded. Like the Model Context Protocol SDK would just be a flat line of 0. And then this is normalized, so 1 would be very high uncertainty, very diverse ecosystem. So yeah, we've got a SDK for pretty much every major language. And I can take a lot of issue with doing a rigorous study off of GitHub star history, but it's a finger in the wind of what's going on, where people's attention is. Like it's a self-select, I clicked the star, so I want to come back here type of thing. And it's interesting, like if you've looked at other open source softwares, a lot of them will have like really big accelerations, into the 50,000, 60,000 star count ranges. And the Model Context Protocol has really leveled off. So I'm not sure exactly why that is. Maybe we all just don't use GitHub like we once did. Here's just a refresh on the official official MCP registry right here. This is showing where the packages are hosted. So despite Python being the most popular SDK, NPM is the most popular registry. And there's a number of other registries out there, Smithery being one of the more popular ones as well. This study just looks at NPM, A, because it's easier data to work with, and then B, most of the downloads from Smithery actually just point back to NPM anyway. So this is sort of like the root of where everything is. So we've got 3 categories. The model context protocol for TypeScript, this is all downloads from NPM that we're looking at here now, is in a category of its own. It's this blue line. Client servers, like out of the box, MCP servers, you could just npx install and be able to run immediately with the client. And then server development packages are packages that help with the development of MCP servers. So you can see that there's this like pretty consistent linear growth, maybe a little bit of acceleration in the last month, but we still haven't seen a big explosion in adoption. Like I thought that this, in May when I was looking at some of the download counts, that this was starting to really take off, but then it sort of leveled off. So I'm not sure exactly what the dynamics are there, but one of the other observations and questions we had for ourselves is how diverse is the ecosystem? It's an open protocol. Anyone can build one of these packages and host it, but it depends on how good it is for people to come and start downloading them. So this is a measurement of diversity. And if it's a 0, that's basically there's no uncertainty in which downloads are, or which packages are being downloaded from the whole population. So like the model context protocol SDK would have a 0 entropy because it's just the one package. Client server, we've got a pretty consistent downslope. Our main hypothesis as to why this is that there's been a big shift to remote hosted MCP servers. So instead of downloading them and running them locally with stdio, they're being streamed with HTTPS or SSE. And that really started to happen in mid to late summer. So that could explain some of this drop off, but there's a consistent downslope anyway. And we'll get into a little bit more of the details of what packages are having breakout moments and really driving a lot of this concentration. And on the server development side, this has just had a generally stable and lower or more concentrated population since about the spring. Okay, so developer friction points. We're seeing, as I mentioned, with this like remote shift that people are really moving from that single user local session to more of like a framework integrated MCP servers. So there's a lot of packages on the client side that have sprung up to help support connecting other AI frameworks into MCP servers or vice versa. And then there's kind of 5 themes. There's like lowering the discovery barrier. So it's a bit of like these registries gaining in popularity. Automate the boilerplate. So we're seeing some packages that just like help accelerate more of the development process of MCP. Interface translation, deployment transport, and then integrate and deploy into existing apps. So this is kind of like all of what I was talking about with building packages that help to integrate popular frameworks into the model context protocol, and then also being able to remote host MCP servers and move more seamlessly from that SDIO process to streamable cloud offering. So from the server perspective, the most popular packages by download count in the last week that we ran this, which was mid-October, are Orville, MCP Proxy, Smithery, Fast MCP, and MCP Handler. So Orville MCP is a package that can help translate OpenAPI specifications into MCP servers, so helping to move along that process of migrating our existing technology, our existing APIs into something that's more useful for LLMs. MCP Proxy is the ability, or gives us the ability to move from that SDDIO process into a streamable remote hosted MCP server without having to do that translation. It's sort of like a wrapper. Smithery CLI is for that other registry, just like giving more of that discoverability to other MCP servers that are made public. Fast MCP and MCP Handler are packages that help aid in the development process of MCPs. So if you're looking to build MCP servers, I recommend checking out these 5 packages right here, especially these bottom 2. And if you're working with APIs or remote hosted, I recommend the top 2 as well. Okay, so then we wanted to ask which use cases are winning early and where is adoption still wide open? And so one of the things that we've heard from some of our portfolio companies, I've built some of these myself, is that there's a lot of first-party development of MCP servers. So bear in mind, like, this is all the publicly available MCP servers that we're looking at here. But there's a decent-sized population of people who are building these systems internally. So the early winners are adoption of these larger remote servers, connective tissue for the frameworks, closing the loop on agentic coding. So this is kind of elephant in the room. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking on agentic coding because this is like the hottest thing. Everyone's sort of aware of it. If you aren't using agents for coding, you should be. If you're not using MCP servers with them, you definitely should try that because it's amazing. Like, it really helps to both extend the usage of these agents into more like up-to-date documentation and also close the loop in testing, right? So like a lot of times, at least in my experience building early on with agentic coding, was like there was a lot of me moving back and forth between the chat that I was having and the actual code that was being written. And then the whole testing process was like making screenshots and bringing things back. But now there's starting to be this ecosystem of MCP servers that allow the LLMs to like operate headless browsers or connect into different databases or remote hosted traditional SaaS platforms that are being used in the development process. So there's a whole slew of things that we'll point out later that are very useful there. And then some of the open opportunities like consumer use cases, creative tools, and search. So early on, I thought that MCP would have had more of a consumer adoption, but most consumers, right, like their AI they're using is ChatGPT. ChatGPT has connectors, but it's not the same as exposing it to an MCP ecosystem. So I don't think that there's that many popular packages out there that are explicitly building MCP servers for consumer use cases. And then on the creative tools side, this is where we're seeing a little bit more popularity for remote hosted MCP servers, but there's still, we think, a good opportunity for a breakout opportunity on the creative tools piece. And then also search. So there are some popular agentic search platforms out there, Parallel Web Systems, Exa, Tavily, Brave Search being among some of the more commonly known ones, but none of these have really taken the crown for being the dominant agentic web search. And maybe there's space for two, but as we've seen from Web 2.0, there was only really space for one search engine. So we think that's an open opportunity, albeit an expensive one. So we looked across almost 4,000 packages that have at least one download from NPM that had Model Context Protocol or MCP in their README. And then we used a machine learning model to categorize these into, I think there's like 11 categories here. The most popular ones, AI tools. This is like connecting your agents into different AI frameworks or connecting them into things that extend their reasoning capabilities. But we can see that despite many thousand servers being classified here, the mean downloads is still relatively low. So there's a lot of like packages people test out but aren't used as popularly. Code and dev has some real breakouts that are being used, and we'll get into that later, as does browser tools right here. So this is more like browser automation. We'll get into some of these other ones. Some of the ones that we won't get into are a little bit lower down. But like file search and CLI commands is interesting. Back in the spring when we did this analysis, those were the most popular categories. There was like really a lot of attention those being drawn into these early sort of nascent ways to use a computer, right? Just give the LLM the ability to run a CLI command. Give the LLM the ability to search through your file systems. But now we're starting to move up the stack into these AI frameworks, into that coding and dev space, and I think that there's good opportunity to continue moving up into that more application level opportunity. So there's a lot of words that were clustered here. I didn't really have the time to play around with matplotlib a bunch to make it super readable, but basically what this shows you is where has the trend slope and mean entropy gone? So that's like going back to this slide, right? All the packages that we're looking at are within this blue. So these are all the client-server ones. And I was wondering, like, okay, are all of them concentrating, or are only a few? And the answer is all of them really are concentrating. Some have increased in their mean entropy, like CLI commands, but there's not many packages there. For the most part, everyone's trend slope is down, and mean entropy is lowering. So the whole ecosystem seems to be concentrating on NPM. But as I mentioned earlier, there's this move to remote servers. There's also a lot of first-party servers being developed. So take this all with a grain of salt. So looking at our top browser tools, this is a good example of a category where there's been a huge breakout, and it's the Playwright MCP server. So this is an MCP server developed by Microsoft, run a headless browser, and it's gained a lot of traction, popularity in agentic coding loops. The second most popular one is very similar. It's for Chrome DevTools. Again, headless browser. And everyone else is really playing second fiddle here. There's not many other packages that have gotten much popularity. But there's other ecosystems like AI tools where there's still a lot of competition across packages. Now, if you look at the names, like there's a few here for N8N, so maybe it's a little bit more concentrated on the actual use case, but from a per package perspective, there's still a competitive race here. Master's another AI framework, very interesting new one that I recommend checking out. Sequential thinking is kind of like how to say it, demo. Like there's a lot of applications or agentic coding loops that you'll go through where they're like, hey, try out MCP servers. There's sequential thinking here. It just extends reasoning capabilities. So that one's a little bit of probably like a faux server. You can see this big spike here. You can see some popularity in client servers that help support remote access. And then there's some big players, Salesforce and Microsoft, that are also producing packages here. Coding and dev tools. There's been a really big breakout recently, which is this Expo MCP tunnel. So I'm not a developer, I'm a data scientist. I don't have much experience with Expo, but I was researching it when I saw this big spike, and it's this like iOS or like mobile application development software. This has really taken off since they launched their MCP server. And then also Upstash. This is one that I really enjoy using. Upstash is for, actually the server's name is Context7, it's made by Upstash. But they give you access to up-to-date coding documentation. So it's really useful if you're working with new frameworks, working with new libraries that maybe the model wasn't trained on. That's gained a lot of developer traction. Figma is a magical experience. If you are designing in Figma and translating into code, that's gained popularity. This Cap.js MCP server is for SAP applications. Supabase is actually, I think, a remote server. So this is sort of like a proxy for that, but that's also very popular, super popular vibe coding platform. I really enjoy building there. And then web search. So here's web search. We have Firecrawl in here. You could debate whether that's a web scraping, browser automation, or web search. We put it in web search. Brave Search is very popular, as is Tavily, mostly because Tavily and Brave Search are relatively cheaper. I think Tavily is actually free compared to Exa, which for a little bit had its time in the sun as a popular server. But as I was mentioning earlier, Exa has moved into remote hosting. And so here's a view of company domains that we were able to track visits. So any web traffic to this domain that's from a fully autonomous, or to these domains that's from a fully autonomous agent probably won't be tracked actually as a visit. So this is visits to, I'm inferring this, but this is visits to these remote MCP endpoints from someone working on their local computer. And we can see that Canva, back to my piece about creative tooling, has gotten quite popular with almost 600,000 monthly visits. And then reading down the list, there's a lot of other popular MCP servers, Context7 having both local installs and remote hosting, similar to Exa, which is way down here at the bottom. At Netlify, this is a popular one that I really enjoy for deployments. What else is here? Neon, these are database technologies. So there's a pretty diverse ecosystem using remote hosting that we can see. And then just to close out, here's a view of the top 7 most popular packages for clients that we've been tracking on NPM. Playwright is far and away the most popular, followed by other dev tools and AI tools. So it's agentic coding, again, that's dominating the use cases here. There's some really helpful server packages out there that you can use to help develop your own MCP servers. Way back here they are. And then also there's an opportunity to keep moving up the stack. We started with seeing a rise in popularity of file systems, CLI commands. Now we're moving into AI frameworks, developer tools, and I believe that there's opportunity to move deeper and deeper into consumer-facing MCP servers that solve real customer problems. So this is it. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. We'll be writing another blog post on this. You're getting like a fun little preview for what the follow-up is. And I recommend checking out the earlier blog post written by John and I.